Last night, my wife stood in our kitchen, looked me straight in the eyes, and said 4 words that shattered everything. I want a divorce. Then she added one rule: I wasn't allowed to speak until she finished. The moment began like any other quiet evening, the kind that usually passed without much thought. The kitchen lights cast a warm glow over the marble counter, and the soft hum of the refrigerator filled the small silences that lived between ordinary sounds. I remember the faint smell of coffee lingering in the air from earlier, mixed with the gentle scent of the lemon soap she always used when washing dishes. But something felt different. My wife was standing near the kitchen counter, perfectly still. Not cooking, not checking her phone, not moving the way she usually did when dinner time approached. She simply stood there, facing the window above the sink. Her hands rested lightly on the edge of the counter, fingers curled slightly against the smooth surface as if she needed something solid to hold on to. At first, I thought she was just tired. She had that quiet stillness about her, the kind that comes after a long day when a person is gathering their thoughts. The kitchen clock ticked softly on the wall, each second sounding louder than it should have. I leaned against the doorway, watching her. The yellow kitchen light traced the outline of her shoulders, the gentle curve of her posture, the strands of dark hair falling over one side of her face. There was something graceful about the way she carried herself, even in silence. At 42, she had a kind of confidence that didn't need to be loud. It was calm, steady, the kind that made people listen when she spoke. But tonight, she hadn't said a word. "Everything okay?" I finally asked. My voice sounded strangely small in the quiet room. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she slowly turned around. Her eyes met mine, and in that moment something inside my chest tightened. Not because she looked angry, or upset. Because she looked calm. Too calm. Her fingers slid away from the counter as she faced me fully. For a brief second, I noticed how her hands trembled slightly before she folded them together, almost like she was steadying herself. Then she spoke. "I want a divorce." 4 simple words. And somehow they seemed to echo through the entire kitchen. For a moment, I honestly thought I had misunderstood her. My mind searched for some other meaning, some explanation that made more sense than the one I had just heard. But her expression didn't change. She wasn't shouting. She wasn't crying. She was simply standing there, looking at me with a quiet seriousness that made my stomach drop. My instinct was to respond immediately. 100 questions rushed into my head at once. Why? What happened? Did I do something wrong? But before I could say a single word, she lifted her hand gently. Not in anger. Just enough to stop me. Her voice softened, but there was a firmness in it that told me she had practiced these words many times before. Please, let me finish first. She took a slow breath, her eyes briefly lowering to the counter before returning to mine. There's something I need to say, she continued quietly. And if you interrupt me, I might not have the courage to say it at all. The kitchen fell silent again. I could hear the ticking clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint sound of a car passing somewhere outside. And suddenly, speaking felt impossible. So I stayed where I was. Waiting. Because whatever was coming next, was clearly something she had been holding inside for a very long time. For a few seconds after her words settled into the room, neither of us moved. The kitchen felt smaller somehow, like the air had thickened around us. I stayed where I was near the doorway, my hands resting against the back of a chair, gripping it a little tighter than I realized. Every instinct in me wanted to speak, to ask questions, to argue, to fix whatever had just broken between us. But she had asked me not to. And something in her voice told me that this mattered. She turned slightly toward the counter again, not fully facing away from me, but enough that her eyes drifted down to the coffee mug sitting near the sink. It was the one she used almost every evening, white with a small crack near the handle. Her fingers reached for it absent-mindedly, tracing the rim slowly as if she needed something to focus on. I didn't say that to hurt you, she began quietly. Her voice was steady, but softer now, like she was choosing each word carefully before letting it leave her mouth. I know it probably sounded sudden, she continued. But it hasn't been sudden for me. The ticking of the clock filled the pause that followed. I'd been thinking about it for months. Months. The word echoed in my head. I tried to replay every recent memory, every conversation, every quiet moment at dinner, every small smile she had given me. Had there been signs I missed? She took a slow breath and rested both hands on the counter again. I asked you not to interrupt because if you do, I'll start doubting myself, she said gently. And if I doubt myself, I might stop talking. And if I stop talking, none of this will make sense. Her shoulders lifted slightly as she inhaled, then lowered again as she exhaled. For the first time since the conversation began, she looked vulnerable. Not weak, never that. But exposed, like someone finally opening a door they had kept locked for a long time. It's not that I don't love you, she said quietly. That sentence landed heavier than the word divorce had. Because the way she said it made it sound like love was the very reason we were standing here now. Her fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the counter. I love you more than I expected to, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Maybe more than I should have. The kitchen light caught the faint shimmer of moisture in her eyes, though she didn't let the tears fall. She glanced toward the window again before continuing. When we first met, I told myself it was just something simple, she said. Two people who liked each other. Nothing complicated. A small, almost sad smile appeared on her lips. But the world doesn't see it that way. I knew what she meant before she even said it. She brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear, a nervous habit I had seen 100 times before. People notice the difference, she continued. They always do. Her voice remained calm, but there was a quiet weight behind it now. The way they look at us sometimes, the little jokes, the comments they think are harmless. Her fingers paused on the mug. At first, I told myself it didn't matter, she said. Then she finally looked back at me. But after a while, it started to feel like maybe they were seeing something I was trying to ignore. Her gaze softened, almost apologetic. Like maybe I was standing in the way of a life you're supposed to have. The words hung between us. And for the first time since she had spoken those 4 devastating words, I realized something that made my chest ache even more. She wasn't pushing me away because she stopped loving me. She was pushing me away because she believed, somewhere deep inside, that loving me might be unfair. After she said those words, the kitchen grew even quieter. Not the peaceful kind of quiet we used to share while cooking dinner together or drinking coffee late at night. This silence felt heavier, like every small sound had suddenly become too loud for the room. The wall clock ticked steadily behind me. Tick. 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 Each second felt strangely stretched, as if time itself had slowed down to listen to her. She didn't look at me right away after speaking. Instead, her gaze drifted down toward the counter again, her fingers gently circling the rim of the coffee mug. It was the same nervous movement she always made when she was trying to keep her thoughts from overwhelming her. I started noticing little things, she said softly. Her voice had changed slightly now. It carried the careful tone of someone revisiting memories that had slowly shaped a quiet fear. Moments that probably didn't mean anything to you, but meant something to me. She lifted the mug slightly, then set it down again without taking a sip. Like when we were at your friend Daniel's birthday last year. The memory surfaced immediately in my mind. A crowded living room, music playing softly in the background, people laughing over drinks. You remember when someone joked about me being your experienced upgrade? She asked with a faint, almost embarrassed smile. I remembered. The comment had been tossed casually across the room, followed by a few awkward laughs. I hadn't liked it, but I also hadn't made a scene about it. I saw the way you smiled politely and changed the subject, she continued. You handled it gracefully. She paused. But later that night, I kept wondering if you wished you had someone closer to your age standing next to you instead. Her words were gentle, but they carried a quiet ache that I hadn't realized had been growing inside her. She finally turned to face me again. "There were other moments too," she said. The kitchen light reflected softly in her eyes as she spoke. "Sometimes when we were out together, I noticed younger women looking at you." Her voice wasn't bitter or jealous. If anything, it sounded thoughtful, like someone observing a truth they had slowly accepted. "You're handsome," she added with a small shrug, as if stating something obvious. "Of course people notice." Her gaze lowered briefly before she continued. "And every time it happened, I would watch you." The way she said that made something tighten in my chest. "I wasn't watching to see if you looked back," she clarified quietly. "I was watching to see if you felt uncomfortable." She exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing just a little. "Because sometimes you got very quiet afterward." The ticking clock filled another pause. "I didn't ask about it," she said. "I told myself it was nothing." Her fingers brushed lightly against the countertop again, tracing the smooth marble surface. But after a while, the silence started to feel like distance. She lifted her eyes toward me again, her expression calm but vulnerable. "I began wondering if you were holding things inside, the same way I was." There was no accusation in her voice. No anger. Only the quiet confession of someone who had spent too many nights thinking about the same unanswered questions. "And the strange thing is," she added softly, "the more I wondered about it, the harder it became to ask you directly." Her lips curved into a faint, almost sad smile. "So instead of talking about it, I just kept noticing more things." The distance she described wasn't loud or dramatic. It was subtle. Built slowly out of silence, small misunderstandings, and the quiet habit of protecting each other from uncomfortable conversations. And standing there in the kitchen, listening to her finally say it out loud, I realized something painful. Neither of us had meant to create that distance. But somehow, we had both been standing on opposite sides of it. The silence that followed her last words felt deeper than anything that had come before. The kitchen lights hummed faintly above us, casting soft shadows along the walls. Outside the window, the night had settled in completely, the glass reflecting the warm glow of the room back at us. She stood there for a moment, as if gathering the courage for the next part. I could see it in the way her shoulders rose with a slow breath. This was the part she had been building toward. Her fingers rested flat on the counter now, no longer tracing the coffee mug. But they were trembling slightly, the movement so small it might have been easy to miss if I wasn't watching her so carefully. "I know you think this is about something that already happened," she said quietly. Her voice was softer than before, almost fragile. "But it isn't." She lifted her eyes to mine again. "It's about something I'm afraid will happen one day." The words lingered in the air between us. She swallowed gently before continuing. "One morning, maybe a year from now. Maybe 5. Her gaze drifted briefly toward the window again, as if picturing a future she had already imagined too many times. "You'll wake up beside me," she said slowly, "and you'll realize something." Her voice cracked just slightly on the last word, though she quickly steadied it. "You'll realize that the life you could have had looks different from the one you chose." The confession seemed to cost her something. Her shoulders sank just a little as the words finally escaped. "I'm 42, she continued quietly. "You're 26. For the first time since the conversation began, the difference between us was spoken out loud. Not as an accusation. Just as a fact she could no longer pretend didn't matter. "At first I told myself it didn't matter," she admitted. Her lips curved into a faint, almost self-aware smile. "I've lived enough life to know that love doesn't follow neat little rules." She paused again, her gaze returning to me. "But the world does." The kitchen clock ticked softly behind us. Tick. 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 "And the longer we've been together," she continued, "the more I started wondering if I was asking you to ignore things you shouldn't have to ignore." Her voice lowered, the vulnerability in it becoming impossible to hide now. "Time moves differently for us." She lifted one hand slowly, brushing a strand of hair away from her face the way she always did when nerves began creeping in. In 10 years. I'll be in my 50s. She gave a small shrug that tried to appear casual, though her eyes betrayed the emotion behind it. You'll still be in your 30s. Another pause filled the room. I kept asking myself the same question over and over, she said softly. Her gaze held mine now, steady but filled with something that looked painfully close to fear. What happens the day you realize you deserve more than this? The word "this" hung in the air. Not bitter. Just honest. She looked down at the counter again, blinking slowly as if holding back the tears that were finally threatening to appear. And the truth is, she whispered, I don't think I could survive waiting for that day. Her fingers curled slightly against the cool marble surface. So I thought, she inhaled slowly, her chest rising before she finished the thought she had clearly rehearsed many times alone. Maybe it would hurt less if I was the one who left first. The sentence landed softly in the room. Not dramatic. Not angry. Just the quiet confession of a woman who loved deeply enough to fear losing it. And standing there, listening to her say it, I realized something that made the entire situation feel even heavier. She hadn't asked for a divorce because she stopped loving me. She had asked for it because she believed loving me meant eventually letting me go. When she finished speaking, the kitchen fell into a silence so complete that it almost felt unreal. For several seconds, neither of us moved. The words she had just spoken still seemed to linger in the air between us, as if the room itself needed time to absorb them. I could hear the refrigerator humming softly again, the steady ticking of the clock on the wall, and somewhere outside, the faint sound of a car passing down the street. She kept her eyes lowered toward the counter. As if she was afraid to look at me now that everything had finally been said. Then, after a moment that felt much longer than it probably was, she whispered softly, You can speak now. The words were gentle, almost hesitant. And suddenly, the silence she had asked for, the silence I had respected the entire time, was gone. For a moment, I didn't say anything. Not because I didn't have something to say, but because there were too many things rushing through my mind at once. Her fears. Her quiet suffering. The months she had spent believing that someday I would simply wake up and leave. It was almost impossible to understand how she had carried that weight alone. I pushed myself away from the doorway slowly. The chair I had been holding onto scraped softly against the floor as I moved past it. Each step toward her felt careful, deliberate, like I was approaching something fragile that could break if I moved too quickly. She finally lifted her eyes as I came closer. There was uncertainty in them now. Vulnerability. The kind that only appears when someone has exposed their deepest fears and is waiting to see how the other person will respond. I stopped just a few feet away from her. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then I reached forward. Not suddenly, not forcefully. Just a slow, gentle movement as my hands found hers resting on the cool marble counter. Her fingers were colder than I expected. When I wrapped my hands around them, she looked slightly surprised but didn't pull away. Instead, her grip tightened almost instinctively, like someone who had been holding themselves together for too long. You really believe that? I asked quietly. My voice came out softer than I expected. That one day I'm just going to wake up and decide I made the wrong choice. She didn't answer right away. But the way her eyes flickered downward told me that, yes, she had believed exactly that. I exhaled slowly. For a moment, I simply looked at her. At the woman standing in front of me. The woman who had loved me deeply enough to prepare herself for losing me. My silence, I began carefully, was never doubt. Her eyes lifted back to mine. It wasn't embarrassment either. I gently squeezed her hands, the warmth of her skin slowly returning beneath my fingers. When people made those jokes, or said things about us, I continued, I didn't argue with them because I didn't think our relationship needed defending every 5 minutes. The corner of her brow creased slightly as she listened. I thought the best way to protect what we had was to treat it like it was normal. The kitchen felt different now. The tension that had filled it earlier had shifted into something quieter, something more fragile, but also more honest. I wasn't silent because I was ashamed, I said softly. I held her gaze so she could see the sincerity in my words. I was silent because I was certain. Her fingers tightened around mine again, just slightly. And for the first time since she had said the word divorce, I saw something new in her expression. Not fear. Hope. Small, cautious, but real. For a moment after I spoke, she didn't say anything. She simply stood there, her hands still resting inside mine, as if she was trying to process the words I had just given her. The kitchen felt quieter now, but the silence was different from before. It wasn't heavy with tension anymore, it was thoughtful, almost gentle. Her eyes searched my face carefully. Like she was looking for even the smallest sign that I might not mean what I had said. You were certain, she asked softly. The question wasn't challenging. It sounded more like someone carefully testing the strength of something fragile. I nodded. Yeah, I said quietly. I was. Her fingers loosened slightly, though she didn't pull away. Instead, she glanced down at our hands for a second, almost studying them. The warmth between our palms felt strangely comforting after everything that had just been said. But then why didn't you ever say anything, she asked. Her voice carried genuine curiosity now, not accusation. If those comments didn't bother you, why didn't you tell me that? It was a fair question. I leaned back against the counter slightly, still holding on to her hands. Because I thought you already knew, I admitted. She gave a small, almost incredulous breath of air, somewhere between a laugh and a sigh. That's the problem, she murmured. I didn't. The honesty in her voice felt like a quiet door opening between us. For months, maybe longer, we had both been making assumptions about what the other person felt. Protecting each other from conversations that probably should have happened a long time ago. She slowly slid into one of the chairs beside the kitchen table, her movement calm but a little tired. I followed and sat down across from her, though our hands remained loosely connected across the table. For the first time that evening, we were sitting close enough that our knees nearly touched beneath the table. I thought I was protecting you, she said after a moment. Her thumb brushed lightly against the back of my hand without her even realizing it. From what? I asked gently. She hesitated. From the pressure, she finally said. From the judgment. Her eyes lifted again, softer now. I know what people think when they see us together, she continued. Even when they don't say it out loud. Her expression wasn't bitter, just aware. They think I'm stealing years from your life. The sentence landed quietly between us. I shook my head slightly, but she raised her other hand, stopping me before I could interrupt. I know you don't see it that way, she said. But sometimes I started wondering if maybe you just didn't want to hurt me by saying it. The vulnerability in her voice made something tighten in my chest again. You've spent your whole life learning how to take care of other people's feelings, I said softly. Her lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. That obvious? Very. For a second, the tension between us eased just enough that we both breathed a little easier. The warmth of the kitchen lights, the quiet closeness of the small table, the gentle way our hands remained intertwined, it all felt strangely intimate after the emotional storm we had just walked through. She leaned back slightly in her chair, her shoulders relaxing for the first time that evening. Then, without really thinking about it, she shifted closer and rested her head lightly against my shoulder. The movement was small. Familiar. Something she used to do often when we sat together late at night. I felt the soft weight of her head against me, the faint scent of her shampoo, the quiet rhythm of her breathing slowly steadying. My hand lifted instinctively, brushing gently through her hair and tucking a loose strand behind her ear. Neither of us spoke for a moment. But somehow, the silence no longer felt like distance. It felt like understanding. For a while, neither of us moved. She remained leaning gently against my shoulder, her head resting there the way it used to on quiet evenings when we sat together after long days. The tension that had filled the kitchen earlier had softened into something calmer now, something warm and fragile. I could feel her breathing slow down. The steady rhythm of it rose and fell lightly against my arm, and for the first time that night, the room didn't feel like it was holding its breath anymore. Outside the window, the world had gone completely dark. The glass reflected the soft kitchen light, turning the room into a small, glowing space that felt separate from everything else. For a moment, it was just the two of us again. The way it had always been. She shifted slightly, lifting her head from my shoulder. But she didn't move far. Our chairs were still close enough that our arms brushed gently together as she looked up at me. Her eyes looked clearer now, though there was still a quiet vulnerability in them. "I spent so much time preparing myself to lose you," she said softly. Her voice carried a small hint of disbelief, like she was only now realizing how heavy that preparation had been. "I thought if I walked away first, it would make the fall easier." Her fingers reached for my hand again, this time more naturally than before. They slid into mine with a familiarity that made my chest tighten in the best possible way. "But listening to you tonight," she continued quietly, "I think I might have been fighting a battle that only existed in my own head." I squeezed her hand gently. "We both were," I admitted. She let out a small breath of air, almost a laugh. "Two people trying to protect each other from imaginary problems. Sounds about right." The quiet humor in the moment felt like sunlight breaking through heavy clouds. She studied my face for another second before speaking again. "So, what happens now?" she asked. The question wasn't fearful anymore. It sounded open, curious, like she was allowing herself to imagine a future again. I looked around the kitchen for a moment. The same place where the night had started with the word divorce hanging in the air like a storm cloud. Now the room felt completely different. Warmer. Safer. "I think," I said slowly, "we stop letting other people's opinions write the story of our relationship." She watched me carefully. "And if those fears come back?" she asked. "They probably will," I said honestly. "But next time, we talk about them instead of carrying them alone." For a moment, she simply nodded. Then she stood up. I followed a second later, and suddenly we were standing in the middle of the kitchen again, the same place where she had first said those 4 words that stopped time. But now the space between us felt smaller. She stepped closer, her arms slowly wrapping around my waist. The movement was gentle, almost hesitant at first. Then her embrace tightened slightly, and I felt her relax against me as if something inside her had finally let go. My arm slipped around her shoulders in return, pulling her a little closer. Her head rested just beneath my chin, and I could feel the warmth of her cheek against my chest. For a long moment, we stayed like that. No rushing. No words needed. The same kitchen. The same 2 people. But a completely different ending than the one she had imagined earlier that night. Finally, she spoke again, her voice soft against my shirt. "I'm glad I told you everything." I rested my chin lightly against the top of her head. "Me too," I said quietly. And somewhere in that quiet kitchen, the word divorce lost its power. Not because the fears had never existed, but because, for the first time in a long while, we had faced them together.